always used to get so pissed off when fans or wrestlers, when putting themselves over at the expense of the partner they just turned on, would describe Marty Jannetty as not Shawn Michaels. After Hulk Hogan, he was the best. There's an inherent cruelty to the comparison, even if it is true. It's lazy. You don't have to diminish one talent to put the other over. It is, I suppose, an easy shortcut to describe the wrestler who is more likely to go further, but virtually every pro wrestler to ever be labelled the Marty Jannetty of their team couldn't lace the man's boots. Jannetty was a prodigious talent. You could even make the argument he was the better rocker at the time. Consider WrestleMania 6. This night was emblematic of Jannetty, the performer, and of Jannetty, the man. The Rockers worked the Orient Express in what was, by some distance, the best match in the undercard. By the standards of the time, this was a banger. That qualifier might be harsh. About a third of the time when the modern super athlete flips out of a hole, they don't nail the landing. Hell, even Kenny Omega, arguably the greatest professional wrestler of all time, at least according to Michael Sidgwick, the man who has redefined the athletic standard in what is, analysing Dominion 2018, as objective a statement one can make about the most subjectively received pro wrestler ever, will wobble on occasion after setting up his middle rope moonsault. After taking the heat, Jannetty mounted the comeback after countering a back body drop by landing square on his feet. In one smooth movement, one that helped create the template for the future of the art form, he tagged in Michaels and together they blasted Pat Tanaka with a stereo super kick. This is a spot that, were it to happen on AEW Dynamite, would draw a sizable pap. Jannetty did it 30 years ago. Jannetty brought the house down with the hot tag, exploding with a barrage of fists before controlling the audience reaction by slowly picking both men up and delivering what Gorilla Monsoon delightfully referred to as the double noggin knocker. For the cutoff, after being drawn into the trap by Mr. Fuji, Sato threw salt in his eyes. Jannetty sold this brilliantly. He was as good a worker as he was an athlete. He didn't flail and punch the air, asking the crowd to sympathise with him immediately. He took more care to make a logical decision. He went to the apron to rub his eyes, but with damage done, he took a tumbling bump over the guardrail, landing near enough to a fan to make it feel like he was genuinely buggered, because you don't risk touching the public if you aren't. As was best exemplified by his incredible sell job in the iconic barbershop angle 18 or so months later, few were better at eliciting an almost profound distress than Jannetty. He was genuinely buggered. Both Michaels and Jannetty rocked up late to the Toronto Skydome, nursing massive hangovers. This was their WrestleMania debut, and they risked blowing their big moment some 3 years after being fired by the WWF for excessive recreational indulgence and an unprofessional work ethic to boot. That was Marty Jannetty for you. If troubled genius is too much, it's certainly more accurate than the one who wasn't Shawn Michaels. The Rockers never ascended to the top of the division. When they did, a freak ring mishap convinced McMahon to strike their tag team title win from the record, and Michaels was groomed for a singles run by late 1991. Vince saw more in him. Michaels had more of an obnoxious showbiz charisma to him. Marty, by his own admission, would scoop up his leftovers, where Jannetty was more earnest in his appeal. He had a down-to-earth, spirited quality prized by promoters that Vince McMahon had, by that time, driven completely out of business. Jannetty was trouble. Despite making a better impression backstage than he had in 1987, he blew a major WrestleMania 8 payoff because he assaulted a police officer. After the intricate story had already been mapped out from shattered glass to euphoric revenge, he was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest. Unable to be trusted, Jannetty was released from the company for a second time in 1992. But as much as Vince didn't see headline potential in Jannetty, his unreal in-ring skill could not be denied. He was given several chances as the turbulence of the 90s played out, because when Jannetty was in form, he was one of the best hands in the land. He was not in form at the 1993 Royal Rumble. The belated grudge match was a drab and, let's be honest, underwhelming affair that Jannetty blamed on a lack of sleep. Michaels blamed it on Jannetty's indulgences. What we know of Jannetty's performance level at Mania 6 and how he lived virtually all of his days renders Shawn's account more convincing, irrespective of the cynicism behind his politicking. Jannetty was let go for the second time in as many years. Amid wider turmoil in the WWF, waning in popularity, he was re-signed just months later. This time, he was on form. After a long and hexed saga, he and Michaels finally worked the barn burner they always had in them. Even better was the final match in Jannetty's vastly underrated series with the original Doink the Clown, a captivating and unique 2 out of 3 falls match in which Jannetty had to solve a psychological maze in addition to fighting underneath against Matt Bourne's accomplished technique. It was a triumph. Jannetty coaxed the very best work from one of pro wrestling's most ambitious and cursed characters. Across this run and his next, Jannetty was mostly promoted as a tag team hand. It didn't work out. It never really did. An old litigious botch returned to haunt him in 1994, and in 1996, Jannetty walked. He spent the next several years as a minor league journeyman, missing the riches of the Attitude Era almost entirely beyond a forgettable WCW run in 1998. He was released in a manner consistent with that company's cruelty when recovering from a shoulder injury. It was difficult to feel much sympathy for him. After a stormy period in the 90s, Jannetty spent much of the next 2 decades on the shoot interview circuit, conspiring to babyface the wrestling industry for passing on him. You can tell why so many people paid Jannetty for his time and why so many of the boys vouch for him time and time again back in the day. He has a tremendous knack for telling a tale, has a dead-on Vince McMahon impersonation, and his comedic timing almost obscures the disturbing nature of the stories he so casually reveals. All he does now is relive those days on society's margins, an old carny disconnected from reality and its changing norms entirely. He regales the entire world with stories as if we're a brother on the inside. He'll laugh at the plight of a woman that the Iron Sheik hospitalized after allegedly smashing her with a short clothesline. Slurring, erratic, and incoherent, he'll piss himself laughing at his memory of the Ultimate Warrior twisting the nipples of a large-breasted woman like he was dialing into Tokyo, spiked with an excessive amount of GHB. Was it like when he shook the ropes, the host asked, unaware of or uncaring about the fact that they were laughing about violent sexual assault like Kurt Hennig had shaved off the warlord's eyebrows? Marty Jannetty lived to party. It was over years and years ago. Nobody told him. He is similarly candid on Facebook. He's become a laughingstock on the platform. If he's not asking whether it's morally fine to sleep with a girl he raised under the belief that she was his biological daughter, although he claimed he was hacked, and if so, the hacker nailed his idiosyncratic writing style, he's asking how to tell which black people ain't those that rape, rob, pillage, and kill. How much of this is all total bullshit is another matter. Jannetty is a self-professed goofball who suffers from depression, towards which people should be kind, if not necessarily forgiving. The great irony is that Marty Jannetty was the better rocker, and he was also the bigger degenerate, so much so he was too far gone to become part of the on-screen act. He did receive further opportunities in the noughties as WWE leaned on his stigma as the old sad sack partner to drive the heft of Shawn's post-2002 babyface comeback in various subplots, but he buggered it up time and time again. And now he only has his ability to own the room as a value people will pay him for. Think of the ground that covers. Jannetty is becoming the most deluded of all the old carnies. The extent to which one should feel sorry for him isn't really clear. That cliched comparison doesn't raise the temperature as much as it once did. Jannetty is either an unpleasant individual, a relic, or a deluded fantasist who fantasizes about committing hate crimes in a bid to stay relevant. Marty Jannetty wasn't the Marty Jannetty of the Rockers, he was an artist. But it's rarely been quite so easy to separate one from the art.